When you look at the countless cancelled Shonen Jump series, one of the most talked about is Ayashimon. We have already talked a few times here on the channel about other works that suffered similar fates to this one. And as a conclusion, we always arrive at the point that the stories are never cancelled like that out of nowhere. There's always an accumulation of reasons resulting in the premature disappearance of a story that had potential. Because after all, this one is by the same author who made Jigoku, which is a very well regarded story. Ayashimon is another part of this tale of Shonen Jump cancellations, and in this case, what exactly sealed the fate? And then next to the back of this world. Ayashimon follows the story of a guy. Magu is a strong guy, very strong. Yeah, the crazy guy is a, in quotation marks, normal human, but he's here blowing things up with a single punch like Son Goku. Yeah, Magu is strangely strong, and the reason for that is quite simple. He wants to become a shonen protagonist. Well, Ayashimon is a shonen manga, and Magu is the main character. I think he's already achieved that dream, right? But anyway, he comes from a horrible home environment of constant abuse, but manga are always his escape valve, a place where he can dive into and forget about everything that is happening. And that's why, since he was little, Mago has trained like his favorite characters, trying to one day be like them, going on crazy adventures kicking the ass of any that appears in front of him. But it happens that he has become too strong. Any fight he gets into after he grew up leads to this. HQ, the guy is farming on a low level area and is complaining that he doesn't gain XP, so his life is pretty monotonous. He trained so hard to feel the adrenaline of a battle, but sneezing towards the enemy and winning doesn't give him any adrenaline. But one day, when he's doing his normal art, he's looking for a job and really needs it. He's in a bad financial situation and he already tried everything he can, but nowhere accepts his superhuman strength. That's when a girl appears. His stinky otaku senses scream. A girl in a kimono, running from a bunch of guys with hair like that. It's his time to shine. And that's where the story develops. Turns out the girl is a yakuza. That alone should be enough. After all, it's a literal mafia that dominated the Japanese country just a few decades ago. And anyone who has played the Yakuza series of games can already attest that Maru would have enough fights under the darkness of Japanese nights. But the girl isn't just an Yakuza, she's also an Ayashimon. Basically, she's a type of being that lives among humans as the personification of yokais. Yokais are Japanese folk legends, mystical cultural beings that serve to explain various phenomena and events in the eastern country. I should make a video about yokai any of these days, but okay. Amazing premise, right? A protagonist who's at the same time simple but different. Silly motivations, but they are interesting enough to give you that feeling of what is going to happen from now on, which is even more reinforced when it's mixed with legendary creatures in the yokai. In this world that, as far as the main character knew, there was nothing magical about it. And because of this premise, this story had the opportunity to be serialized shortly after the end of Jigoku. The potential is incredible. Mixing ancient legends into a modern story is always very interesting, depending on how the author approaches it. We could have something to see how the tales that are so forgotten in modern life deal with all of this different world from an ancient time in which they were part. Or maybe if it takes more towards the shonen battles, how are Maruo and Uraga going to deal with these completely absurd creatures and even have the potential to suspense, maybe even horror, because yokais are often popular attempts by people of the time to explain something that was inexplicable to them, like an animal talking to them was completely supernatural. So to explain this, they made yokais that played this role and explain why cats do their all long johns out there. So the immense potential of the author placing the main idea as yokai is simply infinite. I was already waiting for the Azuki Bean's old man to appear out of nowhere and luring the character characters somewhere and giving them a hard time. Because imagine, you are there deep in the alleys of Tokyo at night and you start to hear beans being washed. What the shit? Like, what? You turn the corner and see an old man with his back crouched on the ground with a basin. And pa! He turns around and you have already fallen into his trap. Sheesh! But that's when the problems start to appear. You can take any story about any random yokai that you put on a wheel and spin and think about what it would be like in a shonen environment, and you will definitely think of better stories that explore these monsters and spirits more than anything shown in Ayashimon. I wouldn't say Ayashimon's story is bad, but the most interesting part, which has the most potential, that is the yokai, are simply used for the most part as a background name and something that perhaps justifies the shonen-fied powers of such a character that appears. And honestly, often the characters and their powers don't even have that much to do with the legend they are supposed to be about. You don't look at this guy and say that he is the representation of this legend. The idea of yokai is kind of thrown back and forth like table tennis. One moment, it's something central that dictates everything in the story. The next, it's just the author explaining what the heck you are seeing, because you can't tell from the design or powers of the characters. Everything is left on the background and is kind of a thrown away idea and is only further explored as an interesting concept. At the end, when they fight with the tanuki, you go through almost the entire story without feeling that the characters have any connection to the ancient legends. What really hinders the enjoyment of this work in this case too, it's just that disconnection between the characters and which yokai they are being weak. It's not strictly a bad thing, if you know what I mean. It could be really interesting too, if done in an engaging way. It can create a situation like, what now? Mago has to discover what yokai is this guy, so he can understand what the enemy in front of him is capable of and be able to win, because if he doesn't, he's a goner. So that when the yokai is revealed, the reader receives the impact of holy shitos, damn, especially if you have the slightest idea of the yokai in question. But right, this doesn't happen. It seems that the ancient legends don't have as much weight in the story as they should when they are one of the main parts of it. There are some little things that stand out, but it's never enough for what it should be with the potential of the idea that was presented. Most of the time, a normal person who doesn't have much background in the world of yokai, which can happen even to the Japanese people themselves, can only understand certain parts if they have Wikipedia open on the side to research what legend that character is supposed to be, and maybe then begin to understand how the character was based on that, because you just don't get enough context in the story itself to understand what legend such character is and what weight that moment should have. But in the end, unfortunately, guess what? This doesn't matter much. The author is both unable to create a certain mystique among readers, making them wait to find out which yokai they are, and to let the readers know which yokai they are and be apprehensive about what they are capable of doing. Almost all of the characters stray too far from the theme they were supposed to represent, as everything leans towards shonen. The most terrifying and dark powers that are explored in any yokai stories become just normal powers that are to be expected from shonen. It gets a little ridiculous. It's a thing that alone turns something with fantastic potential into something very cliche and expected in any random story out there. So everything becomes a bit meh. And the amazing idea of yokais morphs into something simple and potato-y, basically another form, another interpretation of naming powers or attacks. The full potential of everything becomes just that, to justify that this character is capable of that power. And that's why he knows how to attack fire or ice, and not some bizarre, crazy and mega creative stuff out there. It's all very basic and expose bad things that in other other better developed stories. Doesn't matter and you don't even notice it, even if they aren't great. But here adds more and more to the problem, and it ends up that everything that doesn't have an exceptional quality, like you are constantly induced to expect with so many cool premises, everything becomes a little disappointing. Like the characters, their personalities, okay, nothing revolutionary, but they are cool. Maru being a lunatic addicted to fighting, it's crazy, but because they don't have a concrete structure around any of them, they fail to pull their own weight. Apart from Uraga and Hachihime, you can't feel that any of the characters are people with thoughts. Like Maru is a cool character, he has an amazing premise, but what goes on around him never make him a truly interesting character, and all characters are like that, so everything turns into something with a simplistic and cliche idea. Everything stays on just an okay level, and the story as a whole is very flat, where the very good things are dragged down to a plain level, and the very bad things are elevated to the same level. When reading it, you always feel like there's something missing, and it never turns into a story that tries to emulate the idea of shonen and take it to a higher or different level like Gintama, in the same way that its premise and main character concept tends to make it seem. For example, if you see this character and instead of having the perspective that he is an awful sadistic villain, just like the premise given to him, which by the way is fucking cool, you see him more as a wannabe Boruto and the young people design, wow. And if the comparison is with Boruto, you can already understand the level of the problem. So this all exposes the author's idea of keeping the story simple, but the story itself demanding to be more complex. In the beginning, this exact simplicity is exactly what catches your attention and makes you want to see more. But from the moment the story begins to develop, wandering around Kabukicho and showing the world that those characters live in, the story itself demands a complexity that the author doesn't provide, for several different reasons. Everything has a mega interesting premise that by just being presented makes you wander around incredible possibilities, but most of the time the author is unable to develop these different ideas in a satisfactory way. Once again, it's not bad, it's just average. And after every lost and misused idea, the only thing that constantly goes through your head is, it could have been better, what a shame. At the end of it all, unfortunately, the truth is that Ayashimon manufactured its own cancellation, creating a story that is based on expectations. The more interesting the ideas presented are, the higher the reader's expectations will be. If you present something fantastic, it's only natural that you develop something equally fantastic. This is the expected. The mind of the little hamster on the wheel inside the human head works like this. So if with something fantastic you make something just good, you kind of sabotage it yourself. It's a subtle but very crude way of betraying the readers. The industry is insanely saturated. It's looking for stories to sell as much as possible, and it won't have patience if you don't have the support of the readers, the same ones who pay the salaries of everyone involved. The drop in sales, it's what highlights that something is not going as it should in that story for the readers, whether for good reasons or not. But unfortunately, it's a life dictated by numbers, and art only has value and its place to exist if someone gives enough value for it to exist. If I draw something, it's worth nothing in the world other than my feeling. If no one puts value in it, it has no reason to exist other than my will to do it, and my will doesn't pay the bills. It's a bit of a bizarre dichotomy, because the reality is that the reader doesn't mind consuming something that is just okay, so much that you see those extremely stuffy animes or mangas that you would do better with a notebook in 4 hours, but because they exist in such a grand way, a great value was placed on them for one reason or another. But in this case, they are works that induce you to expect less, and perhaps surprise you by continuing to be mediocre and predictable, but perhaps also creating something cool that you didn't expect. Ayashimon does the opposite of this. it leads you to more, but everything remains normal and just good. When the authors receive the news that they are going to be cancelled, they have to scramble to finish what they started abruptly. Each author deals with this in a different way, but it almost always ends up being very bad. Yuji Kaku, despite having to rush a lot, like everyone else, managed to do the incredible. Everything remains incredibly normal. It fits well with the whole atmosphere of Ayashimon, right? But some of the best ideas and developments happen in this final stretch, which is really cool, even with the whole shitty situation. The truth is that if the author had managed to maintain the level of the fight against the Tanuki throughout the story from the beginning, we would be talking in a completely different video. But the story is what it is, just okay. So the opinion of the masses is brutal. It can make the author's life, but if they don't open their manga and see something that doesn't fulfill what they are led to expect, these are the same masses that sink the author into the mud, even if some people really like the stories. It's a very sad situation that we always bang our heads on these cancellation videos. There could be alternatives, Shonen Jump could be more lenient and such, but that's reality. Ayashimon is a story that, even with its flaws and consequently its short duration, hit deep for a lot of people who read it. Just like its premise, its ideals are strong, never give up. At some point the life you see value will come, and for many people, depending on the moments in life, it will be something that will leave a deep impression, even being able to maybe change that person's way of thinking, which is pretty cool to think about. But that's Ayashimon's tale. It's a story that thrives on potential, but fails to develop each of them in the same way, being a perfect story for the word mid. Ooh, I said the forbidden word. But anyway, that's why it's not surprising that this story spot, a story that had so much future and so much expectation, was opened up to give way an opportunity to other works.